Hello, welcome back to Old Saul. I'm JD Adler. And as always, here at Old Saul, I recite the stories of the Brothers Grimm. From this, the complete fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm, as translated by Jack Zipes there. Back in 1987, Jack did that. Jack Zipes claims this is the most complete collection of the Brothers Grimm, 242 stories in all, some of which he says were never published before. Also, he says this is the truest translation available from the original German into modern English. I'll leave it up to the audience to decide whether he successfully accomplishes these claims. This is the collection I'm reading from as we go through these stories over the next however many. Some of the stories that we've done in the last few weeks have been a little more obscure, possibly some of the previously unpublished ones, very odd. Brothers Grimm's fairy tales are always a little weird, usually violent, often sexist and racist. Whether they're choosing to put those things on display for the audience to judge, or whether they're supporting them, also, I'll leave up to the audience to decide. But these are the tales. Like I said, the last few have been rather obscure, but this one is a more famous one. This is the story of Rapunzel. So you're going to get to hear this week, this episode, the original version of the story of Rapunzel as told by the Brothers Grimm, which probably is going to be a little different than the Disneyfied version that you are familiar with. You should expect this to be darker as we plunge in. Alrighty. I am trying something a little different this time with the standing and doing it as opposed to sitting like I normally do. We'll see how this works out. Obviously, I need to work on the lighting. There's a lot of shadows and glare going on here, so I'm going to need to bring in some extra lights, but this is where we are this week, so bear with me. Rapunzel by the Brothers Grimm. Once upon a time, there was a husband and a wife who, for quite some time, had been wishing in vain for a child. Finally, the dear Lord gave the wife a sign of hope that their wish would be fulfilled. Now, in the back of their house, the couple had a small window that overlooked a splendid garden filled with the most beautiful flowers and herbs. The garden, however, was surrounded by a high wall, and nobody dared enter it because it belonged to a sorceress who was very powerful and feared by all. One day, when the wife was standing at the window and looking down into the garden, she noticed a bed of the finest Rapunzel lettuce. The lettuce looks, I don't know if everyone knows that, but the name Rapunzel comes from this breed of lettuce. The lettuce looked so fresh and green that her mouth watered, and she had a great craving to eat some. Day by day, this craving increased, and since she knew she could not get any, she began to waste away and look pale and miserable. Her husband became alarmed and asked, "What's wrong with you, dear wife?" She responded, "I shall certainly die if I don't get any of that Rapunzel from the garden behind our house." She wasn't dying from the lack of a baby that they desired, but the lettuce next door. Her husband, who loved her, thought, "Before I let my wife die, I'll do anything I must to make sure she gets some Rapunzel." Sweet. That day at dusk, he climbed over the wall into the garden of the sorceress, hastily grabbed a handful of Rapunzel, and brought them to his wife. Immediately, she made them into a salad and ate it with great zest. But the Rapunzel tasted so good to her, so very good, that her desire for them was 3 times greater by the next day. This is like crack lettuce, this Rapunzel. If she was to have any peace, Her husband knew he had to climb into the garden once more. There's a sorceress over there, bitch. Go get your own fucking lettuce. Anyway, so at dusk, he scaled the wall again, and just as he landed on the other side, he was given a tremendous scare, for he stood face to face with the sorceress. "How dare you climb into my garden and steal my Rapunzel like a thief?" she said with an angry look. "You'll pay for this." "Oh," he cried, "please let mercy prevail over justice. I did this only because I was in a predicament. My wife noticed your Rapunzel from our window, and she developed such a great craving for it that she would have died if I hadn't come. If she didn't, what? She would have died if I hadn't brought her some to eat." Upon hearing that, the anger of the sorceress subsided, and she said, "If it's truly as you say, then I shall permit you to take as many Rapunzel as you like, but only under one condition. When your wife gives birth, I must have the child. You needn't fear about the child's well-being, for I shall take care of it like a mother." In his fear, the man agreed to everything. And when his wife had the baby, the sorceress appeared at once. She gave the child the name Rapunzel and took her away. Rapunzel grew to be the most beautiful child under the sun. But when she was 12 years old, the sorceress locked her in a tower that was in a forest. It had neither door nor stairs, only a little window high above. Whenever the sorceress wanted to get in, she would stand below and call out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair for me." Rapunzel's hair was long and radiant, as fine as spun gold. Every time she heard the voice of the sorceress, she unpinned her braids and wound them around a hook on the window. Then she let her hair drop 20 yards, and the sorceress would climb up on it. See, that's interesting. I always wondered about the whole pulling on the girl's head thing of people climbing up her hair. And then Brothers Grimm actually answered that she wrapped it around a hook on the window first and then dropped it down. So, okay. And the sorceress would climb up on it. A few years later, a king's son happened to be riding through the forest and passed by the tower. Suddenly, he heard a song so lovely that he stopped to listen. It was Rapunzel, who passed the time in her solitude by letting her sweet voice resound in the forest. The prince wanted to climb up to her, and he looked for a door, but he could not find one, so he rode home. However, the song had touched his heart so deeply that he rode out to the forest every day and listened. One time, as he was standing behind a tree, he saw the sorceress approach and heard her call out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Then Rapunzel let down her braids, and the sorceress climbed up to her. "If that's the ladder one needs to get up, I'm also going to try my luck," the prince declared. The next day, as it began to dark, he went to the tower and called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." All at once the hair dropped down and the prince climbed up. When he entered the tower, Rapunzel was at first terribly afraid, for she had never laid eyes on a man before. However, the prince began to talk to her in a friendly way and told her that her song had touched his heart so deeply that he had not been able to rest until he had seen her. Rapunzel then lost her fear, and when he asked her whether she would have him for her husband, I love how quickly people are like on the get marriage train in these stories. When he asked her whether she would have him for her husband, and she saw that he was young and handsome, she thought, how would she know whether or not he was handsome if she's the first man she ever met? She thought, he'll certainly love me better than old Mother Gothel. She said yes and placed her hands in his. I want to go with you very much, he said, but I don't know how I can get down. Every time you come, you must bring a skein of silk with you, and I'll weave it into a ladder. When it's finished, then I'll climb down, and you can take me away on your horse. I mean, not to nitpick, but you could just cut off your hair and turn that into whatever. They agreed that until then he would come to her every evening, for the old woman, who I guess is Mother Gothel apparently, only came during the day. Meanwhile, the sorceress did not notice anything until one day Rapunzel blurted out, Mother Gothel, how is it that you're much heavier than the prince? When I pulled him up, he's here in a second. You godless child, exclaimed the sorceress. What's this I hear? I thought I had made sure you had no contact with the outside world, but you've deceived me. In her fury, she seized Rapunzel's beautiful hair, wrapped it around her left hand several times, grabbed a pair of scissors with her right hand, and snip, snap, the hair was cut off, and the beautiful braids lay on the ground. Then the cruel sorceress took Rapunzel to a desolate land where she had to live in great misery and grief. On the same day that she had banished Rapunzel, the sorceress fastened the braids that she had cut off onto the hook on the window, and that evening, when the prince came and called out, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair, she let the hair down. The prince climbed up, but instead of finding his dearest Rapunzel on top, he found the sorceress, who gave him vicious and angry looks. Well, not looks. Aha, she exclaimed with contempt. You want to fetch your darling wife, but the beautiful bird is no longer sitting in the nest, and she won't be singing anymore. The cat has got her, and it will also scratch out your eyes. Rapunzel is lost to you, and you will never see her again. The prince was beside himself with grief, and in his despair he jumped off the tower. He escaped with his life, but the thorns he fell into pierced his eyes, so he became blind. Now he strayed about in the forest, ate nothing but roots and berries, and did nothing but mourn and weep about the loss of his dearest wife. Thus he wandered for many years in misery. Eventually, he made his way to the desolate land where Rapunzel was leading a wretched existence with the twins, a boy and a girl, to whom she had given birth. All right. When he heard a voice that he thought sounded familiar, I didn't even know she was pregnant, but all right. When he heard a voice that he thought sounded familiar, he went straight toward it, and when he reached her, Rapunzel recognized him. She embraced him and wept, and as two of her tears dropped on his eyes, they became clear, and he could see again. Then he escorted her back to his kingdom, where he was received with joy, and they lived happily and contentedly for a long time thereafter. Well, that was one of the least gruesome of the Grimm's fairy tales I've seen so far. They say towards the beginning of the story that the Lord let them know that she was pregnant, or that to expect a baby. And then she starts getting these cravings. So the idea is that all those crazy cravings women get when they're pregnant is what drove the husband into the garden to get the Rapunzel. And then the witch takes advantage of that to et cetera, et cetera. So once again, this is a story by the Brothers Grimm where the evil women have caused all this horrible stuff to happen. And then love, of course. I love the fact that people are always so quick to fall in love. You know, they barely know each other. They just met. This is the first man she's ever seen. And then he's like, oh my God, first time I met you, let's get married. She's like, yeah, let's get married. And that appears to be shorthand by the Brothers Grimm over and over again for they decided to knock boots, right? And then, because then she's pregnant. And that's all by inference, right? She's just, when he finds her again, by dumb luck, wandering around blind, she's had 2 kids by him, which, if you, the black letter reading, you would have thought they intended to get married once she was free, which may be true, but they did not waste time waiting for that to occur. They behaved like adults behave. So, but there's no spelling that out for the audience. That just, oh, they had kids. Of course they had kids. Of course they had sex. So that's just there in the story, waiting for you to be understood. That's just implied without any sort of double entendres or whatever to clue the audience in that they're expecting you to pick up on that until there's a baby. And then, of course, there's the number of times within the story that people just stumble upon things. Him stumbling upon, and then twice the prince and the king. Life in the Grimm's fairy tales is always random. Even when God interferes or whatever, it's done in a random way. But there's no like, oh, because you did this, God just decides one day you're going to get this. But like the wandering of the king, of the prince upon the tower, and then the wandering of the blind prince, and finding the wasteland where the witch had dumped Rapunzel, and just stumbling upon Rapunzel. In the whole wide world, as a blind man is just wandering around, he just stumbles upon the one woman he was looking for. It's, and why was nobody from his kingdom looking for him or riding with him? Those kinds of questions, there's a lot of internal. The Brothers Grimm don't care about that kind of continuity issue. They want to get these specific things told because they want to make whatever the point is. I still, most of these stories, I'm lost as to the point. What was the point of the Rapunzel story? Don't get your wife her cravings? I don't know. What was the point of that story? That life that does, I guess in that one, life worked out in the end. Usually their stories, life does not work out in the end. In this one, life did work out in the end for them. I don't know. It seems like quite often that the only point of the stories is that life is overall is capricious and random, and there's nothing you can do but persevere. And maybe that is the point of all their tales. I'm not sure. It does seem to be the only consistent theme I can see across all of them. And fair enough. I mean, you're not wrong. Brothers Grimm. But anyway, that's where we are this week. That was the story of Rapunzel. Next time, we have the 3 little gnomes in the forest. The 3 little gnomes in the forest is what we'll be doing on the next episode. I'm JD Adler, and this has been Old Saul. Thank you.